If you saw HBO's Watchmen, it might have been the first time you learned about the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. That's understandable because the massacre happened 100 years ago this month, and it's not often taught in American schools. Even in Tulsa, there was a news blackout on the massacre for decades. But today on Capitol Hill, the House held a hearing on the massacre and heard directly from survivors. In the early 20th century, the Greenwood district of Tulsa became one of the most prosperous black communities in the entire United States. It was known around the country as Black Wall Street. It was the center for black businesses, entrepreneurs, and culture. But on May 31st, a white mob descended on the area, burning homes and businesses and killing up to 300 black residents. The oldest living survivor is 107-year-old Viola Fletcher. She was 7 years old at the time of the massacre.
The night of the massacre, I was awakened by my family. My parents and 5 siblings were there. I was told we had to leave, and that was it. I will never forget the violence of the white mob when we left our home. I still see black men being shot, black bodies lying in the street. I still smell smoke and see fire. I still see black businesses being burned. I still hear airplanes flying overhead. I hear the screams. I have lived through the massacre every day. Our country may forget this history, but I cannot. I will not.
Joining us now is Tiffany Crutcher, who testified at the House hearing today. Her great-grandmother was a survivor of the massacre. Crutcher helped found the Tulsa Community Remembrance Coalition. She is also founder of the Terrence Crutcher Foundation, named after her brother, who was shot to death by Tulsa police in 2016. So thank you. First of all, thank you so much for joining us tonight on this historic day.
Thank you so much for having me, Zerlina. I appreciate it.
So lay out for us why the House hearing was so important and what you hope to achieve.
Well, today I'm still on cloud nine. I'm still just full of emotions. The hearings were just powerful, hearing from 3 of the last known living survivors, and there wasn't a dry eye in the room. And we have been fighting for repair, respect, and restitution for a very long time. Back in 2007, you had a litany of survivors who were still living, who came to the nation's capital seeking reparations for what happened back in 1921. And the Supreme Court wouldn't hear the case and said that the statute of limitations had run out. And so here we are yet again trying to undo that miscarriage of justice. And as we approach next week, the 100-year anniversary, this very moment, to just sit in the seats of democracy and allow these centennials to come to D.C. for this first time was just, I don't even have the words to describe what I felt in that moment today.
And especially given the context of what happened in Tulsa specifically, I think it's so important for us to really unpack here for folks who this is the first time they're hearing about this story. You know, the spark for the massacre was largely a made-up story about a black man assaulting a white girl, as so many other race massacres in the 20th century, early 20th century were. But in your view, do you actually think it was white anger about black economic prosperity that fueled this violence? Because firebombing Black Wall Street specifically and burning businesses to the ground seems like that has a very specific intent behind it.
That's exactly what it was. It was simply jealousy and anger that our ancestors, Black people, were thriving. They were prosperous. We were Black Wall Street, the Black Mecca. We didn't have to go outside of our communities for anything. We owned airplanes and doctors' offices. We were lawyers, movie theaters. We had our own schools. And so that story of a white woman or a white girl being attacked, that was just a white supremacist tactic that happened throughout the era of Jim Crow. And there was this unwritten law, as Ida B. Wells stated, that, you couldn't piss off a white woman. And so I don't believe that that was the actual issue. That was just the excuse. If it wasn't that, it would have been something else. It was inevitable and it was bound to happen. And so, man, here we are 100 years later, finally telling the story of what happened. And I played on that blood-stained soil, not knowing about it, not learning about it in middle school or high school. It wasn't until I went off to college that I learned about my great-grandmother's community being burnt down and that she had to flee in fear of her life.
It's such an important part of American history. I mean, in some ways, do you think that, the resentment and jealousy that you're speaking about in terms of white Americans feeling threatened by black people making money, I mean, I feel in some ways it kills the idea that respectability politics are a thing, because you see the most respectable, affluent black people who have their own businesses are lawyers and educators, and they're still treated as less than human. So, do you think that the respectability politics idea, should we just put that aside? Because I think the Tulsa massacre actually debunks that as respectability saving you from white supremacist terrorism.
Exactly. And you may have heard in the hearing today that T.W. Shannon spoke and testified for the other side, simply stating that if we just invest and save and we can thrive again. But what people don't understand is that we were thriving. We were prosperous. But white supremacy, anti-Black racism, racial terror, violence robbed us of our generational wealth. And J.B. Stratford, I think about him, who owned one of the nicest hotels in the world. He could have been the Hyatt. He could have been the Marriott Hotel. And then, Uncle Red, Hughes Van Ellis, who served this country, he came back home and still was treated less than. But today, he had everybody in tears stating, I still believe in America. And so I think that was the takeaway today.
Powerful. So the Tulsa Race Massacre Commission just removed the Oklahoma governor from the panel after he signed a bill that bans teaching about race and racism. Why do you think the commission removed him?
Well, it's antithetical to their mission. I mean, they're getting ready to open up the Greenwood Rising History Center that really speaks about the white the anti-Black racism that burned down Greenwood. And so it would be difficult. And I think they couldn't actually go into this centennial with having people on a commission that don't believe that Black Lives Matter, that don't believe in truth-telling and extending tradition and inspiring hope. And so I think it was vitally important and necessary. And there's still others that we believe within the Black community that shouldn't be on there either. And so, but I think they did the right thing.
It's fascinating to watch, and I hope you'll come back and join us and give us some updates on the progress. I know that there has been a lot of progress in terms of finding remains in Tulsa and full accountability and the hearings today. Tiffany Crutcher, thank you so much for being here tonight. Please stay safe.